Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden.
And I'm Christina Hoff-Summers.
And we have just such a big guest that we don't really have time to do a lot of banter up top. I'll just say should I just say who the guest is?
Yes.
It's a mansplainer.
Yes.
Sam Harris.
Sam Harris. You know, he has serious-minded followers, so maybe we should save our femsplaining till the end.
I don't know. I mean, he's one of the biggest podcasters on planet Earth.
Yes.
He was one of the early ones. I mean, he got in early.
Yes.
He's a neuroscientist. He's a philosopher. He's an author. He's a religious critic. And also, according to his bio, he's a public intellectual, as opposed to a private intellectual, right? Like, how do we get on the public intellectual? How do you even get that title?
He's also a member of the intellectual dark web.
He's also a member of what the late Christopher Hitchens called the 4 horsemen of the counter-apocalypse. This makes him sound very dark, like a warlock. It says, the 4 horsemen of the counter-apocalypse, I'm reading this, is a group of non-believers who around 2006 each published a best-selling book arguing that religious belief is pernicious nonsense. But we don't want to talk to him about that, right? Because he's such an interesting man, and whenever he comes on podcasts or interviews, he's always asked to go into these, metaphysical conversations. And we never get to hear about him and who he is and how he became
acid trips. We want to hear about those.
Well,
I want to compare stories.
Well, I think he was not of the hippie era, although he did experiment a lot with this. He did it kind of a
serious way. We were partying.
But I think, as you say, I mean, he has so many fans, and if we're lucky, we'll get some to listen to this podcast and then maybe subscribe and follow us. But then what I fear is if we were to do our usual up-top banter and stuff chatter, that we do, pointless female chatter, that we might lose them.
So is that my cue to not talk about this article involving sticking garlic in your vagina?
Okay, this is Zoe. For those who don't know, this is Zoe, our production assistant in the studio, and I thought we weren't going to bring that up, Zoe.
I don't understand, and I will not respond.
I thought we were going to talk about symmetry between threats and opportunity, one of the topics of Sam Harris, or maybe the map of misunderstanding, not garlic in your vagina, Zoe.
Or digital humanism. Okay, tell us what it's about.
Tell us what it's about.
I do feel it's important because, although we have these grand philosophical topics that Sam discusses, this is a pressing public service announcement that needs to happen.
Okay, it's a public service announcement.
Regardless of your gender. Men, tell your women not to do this. Women.
Oh, don't put it that way.
Don't put it that way.
They'll get a shoe thrown at their head,
and she'll do it just to spite him.
So
what is it? Because just to put in context, because to be fair, a recent podcast we discussed we ended the myth that vodka tampons get you drunk. There's the latest thing, CBD.
Like who believed that myth?
CBD.
Y'all believe that myth.
I didn't believe it. I'm on Snopes. I disproved it through hard research. And then we had CBD suppositories, which do seem to have some merit. But now, Zoe, I think what you're trying to tell us is that this has gone beyond anything we could have imagined.
So I encountered this article. I like to read Vice. I find lots of interesting articles on Vice. And this one, for some reason, is in the food category, which feels wrong to me.
Oh, like the recipes?
Yes, it's in
my God.
It's in the category munchies.
Oh, my goodness.
But okay, go on.
So the headline is literally, "Please stop putting garlic in your vaginas. OBGYN begs."
Okay, who's doing this except people who are worried about vampires?
So
really rude vampires.
Have you done this?
Vampire rapists.
You've done this.
I have never done this.
Okay, but
Never.
Last week we
This sounds like toddlers. Don't put your fingers in electric sockets. Like, why would you do this, Zoe?
Well, apparently it's an urban myth. So this female gynecologist,
God, I hope so.
whose name is Dr. Jennifer Gunter, recently put out a piece in the New York Times that is literally called "Here Are Things Not to Put in Your Vagina," in which she had to explain to people why. This is a list of things she had to explain. These are some examples.
These are real. Like, it's
yes.
not a myth. These are things that in her practice she's encountered women do.
Yes. Lemon juice,
Ooh.
yogurt, sea sponges, Vicks Vapo Rub, makeup sponges.
Why?
And an Etsy-generated abomination that involved tree bark and ground-up wasp larvae. I'm not sure what those ones were for. But basically, there was an urban myth that was... So, are you familiar with Monistat, which is the...
Yeah. That's an actual medication that you use when you have a yeast infection. Right.
So, apparently... This is a quote from Monistat, the company. It says, "In some circles, garlic is revered for its detoxifying qualities. For those that subscribe to garlic's medicinal use, they believe it can be used to treat yeast infections by inserting it into the vagina." So, Dr. Gunter addressed this myth and said, "Many vaginal garlic aficionados slide a clove, into nature's pocket because they believe that allicin, I believe that's how it's pronounced, which is a sulfur compound that's present in garlic, has antifungal properties."
Oh, God, this is...
It works.
What?
It works.
Christina,
So-
you're all over this.
The reason why it does not
I
work,
thought you smelled kind of funky.
so the reason it doesn't work, and she explains, is that in order for garlic to ever have any sort of medical effect, it has to be crushed or chopped. So putting a whole clove in your vagina will do nothing except expose you to possible soil bacteria that could be clinging to the outside.
Why can't you just slice it?
What if you chop it finely, saute it with a little onion, maybe some
This is
tomato?
the next experiment. But apparently...
I think we are. Now I understand why it was in the food section.
Right.
Recipes for your
vagina.
Oh.
So there's, just so you know how many people are doing
Eating
this.
out.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
There is
Okay.
This is becoming so low-minded. How are we going to
This is
explain this
not
to the
a good
Sam
way to- the
Harris
Sam
fans?
followers.
They're
I
all
have
just
facts.
like...
And they're-
I have a fact, though.
Oh,
so that we
okay.
can
And then
at
we
least
have
put
to
some
then we have to
numbers.
end this.
Yeah,
Then
we
have
want
to end
some
this.
empirical data.
Yeah,
Right.
empirical data.
So the Scientific American, which is a magazine, interviewed the director of the Drexel Vaginitis Center, and he said that as many as 10% of his patients have tried using garlic as a cure for a yeast infection. So,
Because it works. It works.
all right,
Never
you
mind.
try it.
Okay, let's go back to digital humanism and the key to the mind. This is why the Sam Harris fans are tuning in.
Proofs for the non-existence of God. We're going to
Or ontological proof for the non-existence of garlic curing.
This is zero.
okay,
There's a
we'll
real
get to
180 that we did there.
All right, well, just before we bring on Sam, we want to talk about one of our great sponsors, Brooklinen. So Brooklinen, as you know, Christina, is this fabulous company that is bringing you 5-star hotel quality bed linens for not 5-star prices. And one of the things that I'm very excited about this month is we think of it as only selling sheets and blankets and pillows, which they all do. But one of the things that I've discovered for summer, which is great, is they have Haman or Turkish towels, those beautiful thin striped, and you can get those and you can put them in your bathroom or by your sauna if you have one and just feel
so plush.
They're so plush and beautiful. And they also have
Robes and
they have robes. They have 3 different types of towels, from the ultra plush to the super thin if you're not like a plush towel person.
And also, people should check out the newest linen collection. They have just this beautiful assortment of colors. And they have, what is it, like 35,000 5-star reviews? And they're legitimate. I mean, this is a fantastic assortment of linens and towels in all possible colors.
And I love linen in the summer. I mean, people think you have to like starch it or iron it, but it's so beautiful, just soft and
You know what I
rumpled.
find? If you leave it on your bed and it's wrinkled,
Yeah.
somehow after a few days the wrinkles are gone. I'm not sure why.
If you roll around enough,
Roll
you press
around,
them.
or
But yes.
they settle down.
Well, anyway, we're proud to represent Brooklinen. If you want to get a deal on any of these products, you can get 10% off and free shipping when you use promo code FEMSPLAIN at brooklinen.com. And they're so confident in their product that all their sheets, comforters, and towels come with a lifetime warranty. So
But the only way to get the 10% off and the free shipping and all that is to use the promo code FEMSPLAIN at brooklinen.com. That's BROOKLINEN.com. Promo code FEMSPLAIN.
Okay, and now before we put our listeners to sleep on beautiful sheets, let's bring on Sam Harris. Hi, Sam. Welcome to the Femsplainers.
Thank you. Pleasure to be on your show.
Well, Christina and I were talking about things we wanted to ask you, obviously, before you came on, and we realized that you're so often put in the position of mansplaining. We never get to hear about Sam Harris, the man. And so if you don't mind, we would like to make this more personal than maybe you're used to doing.
For example?
Sure. We can see what happens.
Well, the first question, Christina here. Sam, welcome to the Femsplainers.
Thank you.
What is your preferred cocktail?
Well, I bounce around between a few, but of late, the old-fashioned has been the go-to drink.
Aha, well...
That makes you a traditionalist.
I guess, yeah. I'm a character out of Mad Men, apparently.
Yes.
So tell us about young Sam as a teenager, Sam as a high school student. What were you like? Were you interested in science? Were you nerdy?
Were you on the debate club?
No, I don't think there was a debate club. I think I could have been or should have been. I mean, that was definitely my attitude toward conversation. I mean, I was always somebody who was happy to litigate points until everyone was bored. But yeah, I mean, I was a very diligent student, but also a fairly diligent partier as well. I mean, I was basically, every weekend I was having a lot of fun, and every school night I was grinding. So it was not perhaps not a perfect balance, but it wasn't obviously out of balance either. I had a lot of fun, and was also a good student.
Drugs or alcohol, or both?
Alcohol first, and then I think I started smoking pot when I was 14.
Yeah,
I think, and again, not I was never an everyday smoker because I was a pretty committed student, but I think I was an every weekend smoker from 14 or 15 on until college, certainly, and then college was just, probably an unhealthy level of binge drinking. But again, probably only on the weekends, if memory serves. That's why I can speak with some aspersion about Brett Kavanaugh. I know what it was like to be a binge drinker, and I don't have those stories of groping women in dorm rooms with the door barred circulating about me. But yeah, I think I probably drank and smoked more than I would want my son, if I had one, to be doing in the precisely the same circumstance.
But you took you took a direction towards philosophy, and when you were in high school, were you already reading philosophical texts and debating metaphysical issues? Yeah,
I was always. I mean, I guess it was not. I was pretty omnivorous with respect to my interests. I mean, I was interested in really everything I was studying at the high school level, and I was probably more weighted toward the humanities at that point. I mean, I wanted to be a writer. Certainly by the time I was 18 and coming out of high school, I knew I wanted to write. So, and my model of what that meant was literature rather than nonfiction. So when I went to when I left high school and went to Stanford as a freshman, I think I knew I wanted to be an English major immediately, and I was a English major the first time around, and it wasn't until I dropped out and then started writing about the nature of the mind and consciousness, some years after having dropped out, that I realized that I had to go back to school and actually get some more intellectual tools, and because I was then writing nonfiction as opposed to trying to write the great American novel. But when I was in high school, I was very into books and wanted to write, but I was interested in everything I was studying, and I think I had a philosophical and fairly logical cast of mind when I was in high school.
So you then were still captivated by this idea of literature, and you wanted to be a writer. Who were some of the people you most admire, the writers at that time that you most admired?
Well, once I started studying them, I loved James Joyce and Nabokov, and there were people who I wouldn't even think to read now, but who influenced me then. There was like the writer John Hawkes. I remember studying with some pleasure, but I would say, I was reading everything that high school and kids and freshmen in what used to be the Great Books seminar. I don't know if the Great Books track still exists. I think it might have been protested the year after I took it at Stanford. I seem to remember that. I think it was somewhere around 1986 or 87. There was a protest that they were teaching too many dead white men, and I think the Great Books track could have been scrapped. I'm not sure, but
that was at Stanford.
Anyway, that's what I was in as a freshman, and so we had a kind of a mini St. John's college experience for that track, which I loved. I love reading Plato on up.
But then you dropped out of college because. Tell us why.
I dropped out because I got really into meditation and esoteric things like Eastern philosophy, and I was also at that point pretty sure I wanted to write novels. So and it just there was no imperative to finish school if you were just going to sit down and write a novel, and that's what I did, and it just I discovered over the period of a couple of years that the fiction I was writing, once I would finish something, I really felt like I couldn't stand behind it. I was either growing or devolving as a writer quickly enough that every time I would finish something, it would just seem underwhelming to me. So at that point, I never attempted to get anything published, and I got more and more interested in meditation. This interest was, as I think facilitated by a few experiences with psychedelics, and I just at that point, this was like 87 and 88. I guess I made my first trip to India in 88, and started sitting meditation retreats and kind of recapitulated the 60s for myself in a context where I was then surrounded by people who had actually lived through the 60s. I don't remember meeting anyone my age at that point doing any of these things. If I would go sit a meditation retreat, or if I would go to India to study with somebody, I wasn't seeing a bunch of 20-year-olds. I was seeing a lot of 40-year-olds who had been doing this since they were in their 20s, and I think that's probably changed now. I think there's a much younger demographic on meditation retreats, and really throughout the world. But at the time, I was kind of a prodigy of that way of wasting your life viewed from a straight Western secular perspective. But what I was doing was giving myself an esoteric and ultimately pretty useful education. But once I realized I wanted to write and know more about the mind from a Western scientific sense, then I realized I had to go back and actually finish my undergraduate, which I did in philosophy, largely because my view of my interest in all of these things is kind of first and foremost philosophical, but also I had been reading. At that point, I didn't come back for 11 years, and for those 11 years, I'd been reading a lot of philosophy, and so I was kind of well armed with I hadn't been idle, and so when I went back to school, I just kind of smashed through my undergraduate requirements in philosophy as quickly as possible, and had been planning to do a PhD in philosophy, but then decided that if I really wanted to focus on the mind, I should have more grounding in the relevant hard science. So then I made a lateral move to neuroscience.
The novel, as I read a brief bit about it, it was in the form of annotated letters to God, some written by historical figures such as Nietzsche. Clearly you are, and with your meditation, and as you say, your retro 60s, early adulthood, you were on a quest of some kind, or spiritual searching, and one that, as we know, eventually led you to, I guess, is it atheism? But what was going through your mind at the time? What do you think you were seeking? Were you trying to find religious meaning?
Yeah, well, I was definitely an atheist when I was 18. I remember being in the Great Books seminar as a freshman and being, just horrified at the sight of some of my fellow students treating the Bible as though it were fundamentally different from any other book we were being taught. And I was doubly horrified to find the professor doing that, right? So I remember actually, getting into some fairly uncomfortable debates with the class and with the professor around this. But I really hadn't thought of myself as an atheist, and I didn't know anything about atheism. I mean, I certainly would not have known who Madeleine Murray O'Hair was, or anything around organized atheism. I mean, and I see the truth is I didn't know any of that when I wrote The End of Faith either. I mean, I had never been a student of atheism, but I was a logical, evidence-based person at that point, and it was just obvious to me that the origins of the Bible were all too human, and so to see people either be uncertain about that or to be self-deceived about that, it was pretty alarming at that point. But so I know I was an atheist, but I was someone who my best friend died when I was 13.
Oh wow! From what? How?
A bicycle accident. He hit a car, and so that was the first moment where death really intruded into my life, and that was pretty transformative for me. It was it really did sober me and give me a kind of long view of life. I mean, and an appreciation for its precariousness, and so I got interested in metaphysical things and the occult and the psi phenomenon. I mean, this is now as a 13-year-old. I was reading books about this stuff just to try to figure out if anyone knew anything about what happens after death. And so from about 13 on, I had some kind of quasi-spiritual concerns. Then my dad died when I was 17, and that kind of ramified this basic sense that we have a very short time here, and we really have no reasonable expectation of just how much time we have, and death is a fundamental mystery. I mean, it's just completely inscrutable that people die and disappear from this place, and what do we make of life in the meantime, and what is actually worth paying attention to in light of that. And so these were, I was pretty well placed to kind of fall hook, line, and sinker onto some spiritual path or into some set of spiritual practices. And then I took MDMA when I was 18. Again, after having experimented with marijuana and even psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, before, but they had never, every experience I'd had with drugs or alcohol or any other perturbation of my consciousness before had always just seemed like nothing more than an anomaly, right? There was no state produced.
Escapist or whatever, just not.
There was just no significance to it. It didn't have any implication for there being a path to transform the human mind in a durable sense, or it didn't provoke larger questions in me about how to live or whether my ethics were completely screwed up. It just smoking pot was fun. Taking magic mushrooms for the few times I did it was fun and intermittently scary. But when I took MDMA, it really just initiated a kind of firmware upgrade of my brain. I mean, it was just a truly transformative experience, which I came down from, obviously, but coming down from it had a certain character that convinced me that what I experienced on the drug was more true than what I was tending to experience in every other waking moment of my life, and true in every relevant sense. It was true. It was more truly who I was at bottom as a conscious mind, and it was, and which is to say that the experience of coming down seemed like my mind was becoming needlessly encumbered by old habit patterns that were adventitious, were not actually in a core to who I was, but were nonetheless, coming back, and I couldn't do anything about it. And it also just revealed an ethical orientation that seemed more true and certainly wiser than anything I had been able to find on my own. And so, the moment I came down from that, I realized, okay, if life is about anything, it's about figuring out how to be more like this more of the time. And that's when I started, practicing meditation and reading books in, Eastern philosophy mostly, but not exclusively, and in, psychology and all the rest.
You speak about your attraction to the occult and mysticism, and you were taking hallucinogenic drugs, and yet at the same time you were this young man with a very critical mind. You were empirical, you were logical, evidence-based. Where did that come from?
Well,
because not everyone has that coming out of California, and that's where I come from, and I also was part of before you with the real hippie culture, and it wasn't. I didn't really find that among most of my peers until I came and studied philosophy on the East Coast.
Well, I didn't have any religious upbringing, so there was no indoctrination there in childhood. I didn't have an atheist upbringing either. I mean, there was really just no talk of God in the home. I mean, I was surrounded by secular Jews mostly, and whether anyone believed in anything or if any of their parents did, I was unaware of it. So there was. I think it would have been natural if I had been from a religious family. For me, I would probably have interpreted that first MDMA experience in light of that framework, and it's possible. It seems very likely that it could have, made me more religious. Or I would have looked for, if I had been a Christian, I would have looked for Christian tools by which to, pursue the implications of that experience. But I was, totally secular and, just hard-headed and committed to understanding things, logically and rigorously. And I've always had a a discomfort with incoherence in myself and others. I mean, so when I see that, I believe two propositions and they actually can't be squared with one another, something's got to give. I'm not comfortable with the creative tension of believing, two antithetical things for the most part. And so I spend, I'm very quick to try to figure out where the error has been made, and just to debug my code at that point, and debug the code of others. And so I was always somebody who would debate people, when I thought they were wrong, and that was certainly it certainly came online before I had any explicit interest in philosophy or science.
Let's go to your marriage. I told you it was going to be personal, Sam. Yeah. You're married to Annika Harris, and just for the obvious plug, she's just published a book called Conscious, A Brief Guide to the Fundamental Mystery of the Mind. Tell us about how you met her, and also in the context that I think your parents divorced when you were quite young, so you probably, I don't know what your view of marriage was, but tell us a little bit about how you met her and what were you thinking?
Yeah, well, we were set up. It was a blind date that actually worked, which was pretty amazing.
How old were you?
I was 31 and she was 22. So like at the first moment of decency in the West, had we lived in a village in India, I guess we would have been introduced earlier. But yeah, so it was the first plausible moment that we got connected. Though people had I actually knew her mother as a kid, and so her family had been in my life for quite some time. I just hadn't met her. I mean, she was completely off my radar, being 9 years younger. And
how did you know them socially, or just they were in the same community, or?
Our mothers were friends.
Oh, okay.
And so it was. It had, kind of had the feeling of an arranged marriage on some level, but it didn't immediately take off because she was actually just on my podcast and for the first time, and we were talking about her book, and I joked that we had been talking about these topics on our first date, consciousness and free will and related things. And our first date was followed by just radio silence from her end for about 6 months, and I think she literally did not return my emails for 6 months.
So you pursued her, like you didn't just
yeah. Did you stalk her?
Well, it was not. It was a long distance relationship, or it would have been a long distance relationship. She was living in New York, and I was back at Stanford, and so it was just, practically speaking, not a great situation. But I sent her a few emails that were unrequited and thought, okay, well, this is...
Wow, so she was even trying to ghost you, it sounds like.
Yeah, no, she completely ghosted me. But then she kind of came back around, and then we actually, she studied at NYU, and she was living in New York at that point, and we actually had a long distance relationship when I was doing for a year when I just started my PhD work at UCLA, and then she eventually came back to LA, and we moved in together and lived in sin for a few years, and then got married, and we were about to have our 15th wedding anniversary. So.
Okay, great. What made you decide to get married? And again, in the context that you had grown up in a divorced family.
Oh, well, yeah, so my dad left when I was 2.5, and it was interesting to view him through the eyes of an adult for the first time. I really didn't triangulate on him and understand just how strange his behavior was until I had kids of my own. When I had my first daughter and she was 2.5, I had a moment to think, well, this is precisely the moment where my father decided to leave, and not only leave, but move to 3,000 miles away to the other coast, and also not pay child support. And it was an amazing thing for the first time. Now as a nearly as a 40-year-old man, I guess I was in my early 40s at that point. To understand that there was something pathological about his behavior that I just had not been. I knew as a kid it was odd to have your dad move 3,000 miles away, but I just didn't get how odd it was, and so it was interesting to experience that. But anyway, I'm very bullish on marriage. I have a great marriage. I've picked a great woman, and she picked me, and it was just so we've had a great 15 years. But I don't have that so clearly modeled, at least between my mother and my father. My mother then went on to remarry when I was 15, and then had an also great and long marriage. Unfortunately, her husband, my stepfather, died a little over a year ago. So,
did you ever meet your father, and did you have a relationship with your father?
Yeah, I did. I had a long distance one. He lived in New York, and I was in L.A., and I would see him on vacations and for a month in the summer often. But it was very much a vacation face of a parent. He was not really acting as a parent. It was much in that sense. It was all very positive. I mean, he was a very loving guy, and we, I experienced us as having a good relationship. But it was not the substantial relationship of having a dad who's around all the time, who's really functioning as your parent. Yeah, I mean, it was not something that I would that I would envy in anyone else. But it was, again, there was something very odd about the experience of not really awakening to what was wrong with it. Until many years after he died, really. I mean, if you'd asked me when I was, 17 or 18, what was my relationship like with my dad, I would have said great. It was long distance, but it was great, and it was great in the sense that there was virtually no negativity, but there's just something so odd about the life choice he made, and how it couldn't help but delimit the relationship.
Well, in a sense, it was negative in the absence. I mean, I'm also a child of divorce, and I'm sort of interested to hear from you how that changes. I mean, obviously, you're in an intact marriage, as we say. You have two children, not small at this point.
One's small. I've got a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old, both girls.
Yeah, and so two questions, and then we can move on to something else. But two questions: how did your father's model, as it were, affect the way that you approach fatherhood? And then the second thing I would ask you, as someone who is not religious in a traditional sense, that why marriage and not just living together? I mean, I think we think of marriage as being almost some sort of religious thing if you believe in it, but a lot of people just say, it's a piece of paper, and, what does it really mean? So I'd sort of like your views on those two things.
Yeah, well, as far as why marriage, I mean, for me, I guess I kind of flip it around and say, why not marriage? I mean, when I see the people who are living together for years at a time, and even having kids together and not getting married because they say, why marriage? It seems peculiar to me, at least in the context of living in this country. I mean, maybe it's less peculiar in Denmark or some other place in Western Europe, but it seems like you're making a statement that I would have no desire to make about somehow about the tenuousness of the commitment. And the thing that really changes it for me is having kids. You know, I think this is a pretty common experience. You get married, and then when you have kids, all of a sudden you feel really married, and that happened to us. I mean, so you know, it really is. It's not for me. It's around the context that you're creating for, you know, starting a family. It's not so much. It wasn't so significant when it was just the two of us. And then I forgot what your first question was.
Oh, just about how the experience with your sort of absent father. And I think kids, by the way, kids really accept what they're given until they get older, and then they look back, as you say, and go, wow, why wasn't he there? But it's at the time it seemed normal. How has that affected your approach to being a father?
Well, I'm pretty committed to being around a lot. You know, I mean, inevitably, most of the actual parenting falls to Annika. I mean, so, you know, I have spent much more time on my career than she has spent on hers. So we have a kind of, you know, traditional, old school, that is unfair relationship in that department. But you know, we are. I mean, it's just it makes, you know, it certainly makes rational business sense that we have this relationship at this point, or this arrangement at this point, and it also just makes emotional sense. I mean, she knows exactly her tolerance for being away from the girls is much lower than mine, for reasons that may or may not have biological roots, but my tolerance is pretty low. I mean, I really don't like to travel and be away from them for any significant period of time. You know, I do it, but I do it, you know, fairly sparingly. There was actually I didn't really plan this, but I remembered at one point that there was a year when my first daughter was little where, you know, I went a whole year without getting on an airplane. You know, and it's not that I had decided that I could never leave town, but it's just, you know, that was, you know, the center of mass was really, you know, heavily weighted toward just not budging. And I still feel that. I just don't, you know, if I leave town for more than 4 or 5 days, that's starting to feel like, you know, the limit of my comfort with it. And, you know, I expect that to change as, you know, as they get older at some point. But, you know, at this point, it's, I'm just around a lot, which I'm very grateful. I can arrange my life that way.
Well, you're lucky daughters to have you. And are you training them to be critical-minded and careful thinkers?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, by default, it really is unavoidable. I mean, the one thing that is explicit, I don't know if you know my position on honesty and how I view lying as essentially being a kind of the first rung on the ladder of violence. So, you know, I'm unusually committed to never lying or even shading the truth knowingly. And
oh, you're the Easter Bunny Santa Claus buster, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Like yes. At no point did my daughters believe in Santa Claus. And, you know, nor did they envy their friends who did.
And if you read them, Wind in the Willows, you tell them, of course, animals never talk
right.
from the very beginning.
Some things don't have to be spelled out. But so one thing that they have definitely imbibed, or at least our 10-year-old has imbibed it. Our 5-year-old is probably too young to know what's up here. But, you know, they just know that, you know, our oldest just knows that we don't lie, you know, and we won't lie to her, and it's amazing, you know, it really becomes an amazing refuge in relationship. I mean, she just knows we're not going to bullshit her. I mean, and you know, sometimes the truth is
maybe sometimes they want you to lie. No, that was a really good, even though you struck out, you know, you did
right.
really well.
Right. Well, there's invariably some truth that is you know, not, you know, stifling, even in a circumstance of, you know, disappointment or failure, or, you know, when things didn't go well. So sometimes the skill is in finding what is true and supportive in every situation. But our daughter knows that we will not bullshit her, and she relies on that. It's and therefore she knows. She's really gotten it in the water how much we value honesty in our family, and so that's that's something that's definitely been imparted.
What is your approach, though, that you do have two daughters, and in this time, with all these controversies going on about biological sex, and what do you feel? Do you feel there are male-female differences? Do you feel you're raising your daughters differently? You pointed out that you think your wife, is, and all of us who are mothers get this, more intuitive and connected in managing of the child's life. Tell me a little bit what you think of these controversies.
Well, I think there simply is no question but that men and women are different biologically, and that has psychological implications. I mean, it's just culture obviously can accentuate that or seek to cancel that or interact with it in some way, but there's just no question. I mean, you need only look at the difference between male and female chimpanzees to realize that this is just not about culture. This is about biology, and so I think there are no ethical or political punchlines that need follow from that. I mean, I think that's I think we can figure out our politics without ever lying to ourselves about what we continue to discover about ourselves biologically and in evolutionary terms and in neuropsychological terms or in any other sense. But yeah, men and women are different no matter how you treat them, and if you treat them so as to make them the same, you're certainly going against the grain of biology in some significant sense, and there'll be more or less successful experiments on that front. And I think we know something about that. The other cultures approach it in different ways. I mean, with our daughters, there was just no question that they were girls. I mean, they just were not. Like every game of catch that I tried to initiate turned into a tea party in about 30 seconds.
The baseball mitts became the teapots, and I
mean, and honestly, it was not for want of trying. I was, if anything, our bias was, let's keep let's keep the pink fabrics in abeyance as much as possible, and let's let's raise tomboys. Let's just expose them to everything at minimum, a gender neutral way, and see how it goes. And I mean, it was just I have two very girly girls on my hands, and the great and most delightful counterpoint to that is that I'm really into martial arts and Brazilian jiu-jitsu in particular, and it's actually imperative that they get some skill in this area as they get older. And neither one is old enough where it's actually forced upon them, but I've tried to get them interested in wrestling and essentially just surprise outbreaks of physical violence, and they love it because they just unleash incredible violence on me when on a moment's notice.
You're abused, you're bullied.
They're the most decorous and feminine and girly girls you'll ever meet, but then it just turns into the Peter Sellers Cato routine in the Pink Panther movie where we stalk each other around the house and they do their best to kill me. And it's awesome. That is always the highlight of any day.
It's Christina again, remarkable to me how obvious it is that there are these differences. And I think the differences, on average, the difference between men and women, explain some of the disparities in society. Some of it may be discrimination. But it's now the habit in really everywhere in the culture, certainly in journalism, in the universities, to ascribe all the differences that they don't think favor women, like women staying home with children more often than men. They ascribe that to discrimination and won't admit that there could be an innocent explanation. And it just seems so remarkable that we have to teach people to see what's before their eyes, and to tell them to believe what they see with their eyes. But yet there are all these forces in society saying, no, what you're seeing isn't real.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure there's a spectrum here where, what we have are, two bell curves that significantly overlap. So there are men who are incredibly nurturing and, happy to be stay-at-home dads, and then there are men who are the antithesis of that, and, there are women on every point on the spectrum as well, but those curves don't perfectly overlap, and in the stereotypical case, in the general case, in the mean case, the differences are real. And I mean, if we were in a different situation professionally, if it made much more sense for Annika to spend the amount of time working that I do, and it made much more sense for me to parent, nearly full time, well, we would, presumably we could flip it, for pragmatic purposes. But I don't think it would be as good for our girls, honestly. I mean, Annika is just a fantastic mom, and I wouldn't want to, I'm happy. It's not that I think I'm a bad dad, and it's not that I think I couldn't be more involved. If Annika had to be less involved, but I certainly wouldn't wish that trade on my girls, because every minute lost with Annika, it doesn't strike me as a perfectly fair trade. Certainly at this point in their lives. I mean, that may flip, but again, I've only seen this up to the age of 10 with our oldest, and the advantage she's had for having so much of her mom is not it's not something I would want to tinker with. And I mean, I guess certainly could sound self-serving from another point of view, because I get to do like most of my use of my time is fairly discretionary. I mean, I can decide whether to sit down and write another book or engage in another project in a way where that leaves me totally free to make those decisions, knowing that Annika is going to run the show for our family. But again, I mean, it's just I would have to get much better at it to be as good at it as she is, and whether you ascribe that to nature or nurture, I don't know, but there's definitely a real difference.
Well, Sam, I'm going to say the minute your girls turn 13, you're going to be playing like a Metternich-like role in your household, because they're going to start really heavily sighing and rolling their eyes at everything your wife does. So going back to Annika and the differences between you and her as parents, you told us that you met her and you told us about your courtship, but just in sum, what was the quality that attracted you to her and that you most admired? What was the spark that made you decide to pursue her despite being ghosted?
Well, she's always struck me as really wise, and truly ethical. I mean, it's just like she's just a substantial person of a sort that I, don't meet with a lot of frequency, right? So it's just it was just a great connection on that level, apart from just being, romantically attracted to her and all of that. It's just, I felt that I was in the presence of someone who really, I mean, again, she was very young. She was 22, but she just she was just such a substantial person, kind of at the level of wisdom. It can sound like a pretentious term, but it really is appropriate. I mean, she just is somebody who kind of got what was important and what wasn't on a very deep level, and for that reason, she's been just amazingly good company all these years. I mean, as I say, I'm a much better version of myself for being, in her company than I would otherwise be. And that's I've kind of I've to some degree I've outsourced my better judgment, and it's fantastic to have her as a resource on all those levels. I mean, she's the first person I go to for a reality check about anything, and that's always been the case, and I'm very happy to say it became the case professionally as well. I mean, she became, I discovered that she was the best editor of my writing as well. So she was, she's been my editor since my first book. She's been the one who really has given me the most useful notes about everything I've put out there. And so, we've had a collaboration on that front as well. So it's really been fantastic.
Do you have advice to your male followers who, is it just pure luck, or do you think you were open to it, or what would you say to help other people find their soulmate in that way?
Well, it's on some level, it really is down to luck. I mean, you just, how you engineer good luck. That's that would be a good thing to figure out if it were possible. But it's just. I mean, I guess it's possible that not every guy wants the same thing ultimately, even in their most reflective moments. They may not actually want somebody who they feel is their equal, right? I mean, you see, I feel like I see guys either, in real life or at least they seem to be advertising this about themselves in how they live their lives. The perpetual bachelor, the perpetually single guy, the guy who's always trying to date people, his daughter's age, and you begin to see. I mean, so there's a kind of superficiality where it's not really about finding someone who is truly your best friend and your equal to spend the rest of your life with. It's about just chasing. You're trying to hook up with the most beautiful woman you can, or whatever. And so, I think there probably are guys like that who would be unreachable by any advice I would have, if I had it. But I think you just have to be clear about what you actually want. And if you want to find someone to spend the rest of your life with, who is in every sense your equal, and who can make you better than you would be alone, and would be with most others, well, then that's what you're looking for. I mean, then you'll see that people disqualify themselves for that role pretty quickly, out in the world. And so I would say don't settle for less than that. But the flip side of that is that I have no illusion about this notion of a soulmate, right? I'm not saying that. I don't think that it's true that I couldn't have been happier, that I couldn't have been happy with somebody else, or that Annika couldn't have been happy with somebody else. I mean, I think that's obviously not the case. I mean, there's no mythology about soulmates creeping in here. But there are people who really do share your values, or even have better values and can upgrade you, and there are people who don't. And I would say seek the first out.
Well, Sam, I just want to end by telling you that I heard you discuss your meditation app and theory of the mind with Tamler and
your son,
Dave Pizarro, my son Tamler, on Very Bad Wizards, and
his podcast.
And before I listened, I was on Twitter, and getting carried away with some arcane battle between, I don't know, it doesn't matter the details, but I was just going down this rabbit hole. And then I said to Danielle, well, we're going to have Sam on. Well, let's not talk about meditation, because I don't think I'm interested in that. And then I listened to the podcast, and I started to think about my life on Twitter. I spend so much time there. And then you sort of said, like, what is in your mind? That is your life. I don't want that to be my mind.
So basically, Christina has taken up meditation.
I have downloaded the app. I've downloaded the app, and I'm an adult, an age-enhanced woman, but I think I have ADHD, so it'll be a miracle if I can calm down.
Yeah, but she's very into, and as am I. Like, I think meditation in this world of Twitter and everything else is probably what we all need. So.
And it would be very good for Danielle with all of her struggles. Okay. And it'd be good for... No, I'm kidding. No,
I'm uptight. I admit I'm uptight.
No, I wasn't thinking
of that. Happy to help if I can. But I would flip it around. If you're allergic to the concept of meditation, as many people are for understandable reasons, because it's been so entangled with New Age,
with incense. I'm just tired of the sound.
And yoga, and like, what's your intention?
The sitar.
Yeah. I mean, it really is just. To flip it around, we're always paying attention to something, right? I mean, we're always fixated on something, and your life conforms to every one of those moments of fixation. So if you're spending an hour and a half a day looking at what people are saying about you on Twitter, that becomes your mind, and that drop by drop, that becomes your life. And meditation is just really seizing the reins of that machinery and deliberately paying attention to in a way that clarifies a few things that really can mitigate the sense of
it sounds like a workout for your mind, like it's like a daily sit-ups or something that keeps it healthy and strong, and
it helps with emotional regulation and not getting upset out of everything.
There definitely is that, and it can seem as arbitrary as that. I mean, but you look at how arbitrary working out seems from the outside. I mean, you're telling me I'm just going to pick up these heavy objects and put them down and then pick them up again. I mean, well, what is the point of that?
Right.
Or I'm going to run in a circle around this track, getting nowhere. I mean, that's the, but once you get into it, you discover the intrinsic pleasure of all that and the benefits of all of that, and that are not necessarily visible to someone who has no idea what the project is. And meditation is the same thing. It's the analogous mental training.
Well, we're game, and we thank you for introducing this to us. And Sam, we so thank you for your time here. So many words of wisdom that we can take away from this.
Yes.
And we got to know Sam a little bit better, I think, than you didn't have to.
You guys pulled it out of me.
We pulled it. We have a way, and you're not even like drinking your old-fashioned,
Usually we ply the guests with...
Yeah, it's the easiest way, I'm afraid. Well, Sam, thank you for joining us. It's such a thrill to have you. Thank you for being on the Femsplainers.
Yeah, pleasure.
Well, that was, I think, pretty interesting, even for you Sam Harris fans who think you know everything about him. I think we got some pretty great personal details. I loved what he said about his wife. I love what he said about marriage, and that meeting. I liked he said, he also, it was interesting, he didn't like the word soulmate because that implied that maybe there was something, predestined or whatever. But he did say that finding someone who makes you a better person, who you just find constantly interesting, who, it's something to think about and aspire to.
And what he said about honesty and teaching honesty to his children, because I discovered, maybe too late in life, that is such a foundational value. And fortunately, both of my kids are very honest, too honest, actually. They'll, Tamler could be a little...
That dress does make you look fat.
They will say that. But if you think about the very honest people, and you're very honest,
I'm
people
very
are
honest.
charismatic.
Honest
and
to a fault.
No, it makes you powerful.
Okay, but
people trust you. And a lot of people, you're not sure what they're going to do.
I don't know what it is. I don't see it necessarily as a virtue because it does become problematic. But I did follow his rule of parenting with our first child, our eldest daughter, where I was very adamant, like, if you set up Santa Claus and then you have to tell them down the road that, no, your parents were lying to you. I took this very seriously. And I thought, okay, well, we're Jewish, and my parents,
Santa Claus.
No, my parents are not. And they would put up stockings and, Santa would come and give my stepfather coal and things like that. But you realize there are some things kids don't want to know. And they would believe Santa Claus despite what we said and then I felt really terrible at the end of it. So for the second and third child, we went with the Santa Claus because I realized it was just part of what you want to believe as children, including the tooth fairy.
And even before you tell them, they know.
They know.
When I told David that there was no tooth fairy, and he was so mad at me because he knew. But he still wanted the money.
So, the tooth fairy is especially good. But no, I remember reading something that children, this goes more to Sam's point, that children their elder sibling will always tell them that Santa doesn't exist first. And then they won't believe that sibling because their parents say, no, Santa exists. But, I think there are, as I discovered, there are some harmless rituals and fables, if you want to call them that, or fairy tales that kids really want to believe. and I felt a bit of a jerk afterwards of putting my eldest daughter like, oh, it doesn't exist. She just didn't believe us. She believed her grandparents and was fully on the Santa train, as it were. So anyway, that went long. Normally we have time. I think we have time for a little listener reaction with Zoe. No more of these things that these women
None of these are about vagina.
No
thank you.
vagina
Please.
monologues.
So you think we were like Eve Ensler here. God.
Yeah, send it to Eve Ensler.
Let's send that to Eve Ensler. Don't do this.
Okay. This first one is directed to Christina.
Uh-oh.
I'm ready.
And very formally.
Brace yourself.
Bring it on.
Dear Miss Christina Hoff Sommers, full name. I do not think that you should feel shamed by the comments of Paul F. Tompkins, as the nature of a professional comedian is to poke fun. Paul Tompkins hosts a podcast called The Hilarious World of Depression, where he interviews comedians that have struggled with depression as a means to destigmatize depression and to help those who have it feel less alone. I have listened to both of you for years. You are both good people and help others in different ways. That being said, you will always be based mom. Cheers, Alexander.
What's up with depressed comedians?
They're all depressed. That's why they become comedians.
Actually, it's a symptom of depression.
Right.
To want to be a comedian.
No, I think that's true. I think they're all very quirky. But that refers, Zoe, to Christina.
No, I was shamed.
I'm not. We're not even going to go into it. You tweeted something.
But I deleted it, and then
you got all these comedians piling on you, including this one.
And I agreed with him. My tweet, as he interpreted it incorrectly, but never mind. It was preachy, and I deleted it.
Anyway, but thank you to that listener/supporter who. Defending you against the comedian. Okay, go on.
Never upset comedians.
Oh, God, no. God, they are the worst dissers.
They can destroy you.
They can flame you.
True.
Okay.
So this comes from Joey. Joey says, hey, love the podcast, and I'm not easily offended. But the brief comment about Diane Rehm,
Diane Rehm.
About Diane Reehm's voice in Who You Gonna Call was in pretty poor taste. She has an actual vocal condition, which she pretty bravely and publicly struggled with for years.
Yeah, okay, so we were making fun of verbal fry, and I did say, not thinking about it, that Diane Rehm had very strong vocal fry, and then we thought it was just because she was elderly, and then even that's not a good excuse. And then our listener points out she does have a vocal condition, and
Ageism,
I feel
ableism.
personally crappy. I apologize. I would never have made fun knowing that, and I'm very grateful.
Can we delete the podcast?
No, but no, we don't. It's not Twitter.
We're educating ourselves on
but thank you. I really appreciate. We always appreciate. We get criticism from our listeners, and we always read it. We always listen to it, and we take it very seriously. So thank you for that, Diane Ream. I'm sure you're not listening, but if you are, I'm sorry.
And just for your reference, it is called spasmodic dysphonia.
Wow.
But why
is that verbal fry or just?
It's a neurological disorder.
But then why would young women who do not have this
condition do it?
Why do
verbal fry?
Why do they do it? What's the goal?
Maybe they're aspiring to it.
Okay, never mind.
Okay, go on.
Okay. Hi, ladies. Love the show. A very simple question in response to the episode on campus sexual assault, if you don't mind. If a person is able to use regret over a previous event to suggest that the other party harmed them, couldn't this easily be extended to other situations as well? For example, let's say I'm intoxicated and I buy McDonald's at a drive-thru on the way home. I regret the purchase the next day. Should I then be able to sue McDonald's to get my money back for damages relating to the impact on my physical and mental health from having consumed the food? Or if I'm intoxicated and a woman asks me for $20 to get a cab home, I initially say no, but then she convinces me, so I give it to her. Then the next day I wish I hadn't. Can I then claim that she robbed me?
Well, this goes to Hannah Stotland, our interview with the crisis education counselor, and the problem with real problem.
Redefining sexual assault.
Well, also
coercion, which is not morally good behavior.
Well,
but
it's also in the context of kids, male, female, equally crazy intoxicated.
Right.
And then trying after the fact to determine about consent.
Yes.
And he makes a good point, because I've done so many things I've regretted.
I can confirm that because I've been there.
Hey, I have some on you, Christina, but you've had a little too much alcohol. You do things you regret. And most of the time, what I do is I wake up in the middle of the night and I bang my head and I say, why did I say that? Why did I do that?
That really happened.
We used to have a friend who said one of the things I'll never forget. He said he was a depressive. This is David's. No, but he could have been. But anyway, this is a friend of my husband David's, and when they were very young and at college, and he said, "I know someone had to be me, but why did I have to be me?" I feel that all the time.
That's why you need to meditate.
That's why we need to meditate. But so, no, but you raised a good point, except it doesn't apply to sex, right? Because even when we can't figure out who consented to what, we have these problems, and it becomes
men being the default.
Rape or whatever.
Well, yeah.
So,
I have one last one.
Okay.
And it's a nice one.
Oh, phew, God, this has been tough. It's been tough listener reaction.
Christina Hoff Sommers and Danielle and the Femsplainers are a national treasure.
Oh, my God, that makes me fat. We're 90 years old.
And it makes me feel fat.
So smart, interesting, and fair. I think you should have an hour-long TV show.
Oh. We could
Support
call
us on
it
Patreon and maybe
AppFab.
A reboot.
A reboot.
Someone on Twitter said, doesn't Christina Hoff Sommers look like she could be like the third member of AppFab? Thinking they were insulting me.
No. Somebody said on Twitter, I think it was, that I appreciated this, whoever said this, 20 years from now, we could be the new Frankie and Gracie, which I love. I actually love that show.
Yeah.
But not yet. But yeah, we love the compliment. But national treasure.
I would be.
Oh, you're the
hippie.
The hippie.
And you're
I'm
the glamour.
I'm Jane Fonda.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Christina.
I accept that.
Anyway, but. Okay, well, thank you so much. Those are such nice compliments, and we're not treasures yet. But yeah, that's it. Thank you. Any Sam Harris listener who lasted this long through all of the female stuff. We appreciate you subscribe to us. And don't forget to support us on Patreon, where we had a secret after interview with Sam Harris, which you will only get to hear if you support us on Patreon or We Gather. Both are patreon.com
and it can
/
go ahead.
Femsplainers and wegather.com / Femsplainers. And you get that extra content if you subscribe.
And the extra content concerns a certain Tamler Summers on Very Bad Wizards. And Sam resolves a conflict that I have with my stepson.
Well, it's a family conflict.
Yes.
But he also revealed some more pretty cool things, but we're not going to tell you unless you subscribe.
Unless you subscribe.
Anyway.
And support us.
Support us. Keep us going.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Stay with us by following us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. You can always email questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com. We read every one.
We are recorded at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., and thanks to AEI Research Assistant Zoe Appler, who is our production assistant here in the studio, and thanks to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor, and occasional millennial mansplainer.
And listen to us on pretty much any of your favorite podcast platforms. And please remember to subscribe and like us at iTunes if possible. Every like helps us keep our solid 5-star rating. Cheers.